Hello and welcome to the Church Society podcast. I'm Ros Clarke. I'm the Associate Director of Church Society, and I'm really thrilled to be joined this week by not one, not two, but three regional directors. Very exciting. George Crowder, if you've been watching the podcast before, you will have met him. He's been regional director for us in the northern part of the country for, what is it, about 18 months now, George? A bit longer?
Is it that long, Ros?
It's been a while, and
I still feel new.
You'll remember, used to be sort of partnered by Mark Wallace, who was working in the southern part of the country. He's moved on to bigger and better things, and has had to be replaced in all good tradition with not one but two people. So Chris, maybe we'll start with you. You've been on the podcast before talking a little bit about lockdown and those kind of things, but tell us, for those perhaps who might not have seen you then, where you are, what you're based, what you do, and where perhaps sort of what part of the country you're going to be in.
Sure. My name is Chris Moore. I'm the rector of 4 rural parishes in Herefordshire. I'm sort of southeast of Hereford, dangerously close to the border with Gloucester Diocese. And we're a group of about 2,200 people, and we cover about 18 square miles. So it's quite a sparse populated area, full of cattle, full of an awful lot of cider orchards. We're near Western Cider and Bournemouth Cider. So sort of old-fashioned Anglican rural ministry in that sort of setting, and it's great. I enjoy it. I've been here for 9 years now, and I haven't really sort of grown bored of it. In fact, if anything, I'm going through something of a second wind, enjoying it for the fresh time. Now, I think I'm right in saying I'm looking after the Southwest. That's the official title, Ros, isn't it? And the Southwest confusedly includes places like Lichfield. So effectively, it's the Southwest of the country, but also bits of the West Midlands as well, over to Leicester. I mean, I think there may be a list at some stage going on the website, who knows? But certainly knows which bits people are looking after, so they can point you in the right direction. There was something else, Ros, you asked, but I can't remember what it was.
I can't remember. That's a great place to start, isn't it? I must admit, Chris, every time I hear you talk more about where you are and the job that you have, the more idyllic it really does sound.
I am the vicar of Narnia.
Yes, either that or Midsummer, and I do slightly wonder what the body count is in your villages.
Well,
and
it's
always the vicar, isn't it?
Always the vicar, because where there's a funeral, there's a fee. That's why, you see.
Very good. I don't know whether they've run that plot line, the sort of churches needing to bump up its income.
Treasurer, what done it? Yes.
You're the treasurer, exactly. Yeah. That's who it'll be. Good. And then we're also joined by Tony Cannon, who is going to be our regional director in what's left of the country. Tony, just introduce yourself and tell us where you are and where you've been in ministry and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Tony Cannon. So I was originally trained as a chartered accountant, so I was in the business world for about 19 years. And I then headed off to the vicar factory called Oak Hill, got ordained. I actually did my curacy only a matter of sheep away from where Chris Moore is, in the other end of Hereford Diocese. I did that for 4 years. Then I spent just over 10 years in the Cotswolds as part of the Chipping Norton team, looking after some villages and a team ministry there, but I was the team vicar, not the team rector. And finally, I moved on to Woking, to a big suburban church there, did that for 6.5 years. And my wife and I retired a bit early because of slightly poor health. And we're now down in Hailsham near Eastbourne, which is great. And it's lovely to be able to take on this role, which is kind of my heart.
We have a Church Society Trust parish in Hailsham, don't we? Which I think is where you're at church. Yeah. And if you have not been listening to the podcast regularly since its inception, you may have missed the episode where I chatted with David Bourne, the vicar there, and his wife, and they gave me all the lowdown on the Hailsham Parish Church. So you might want to go and look that up to catch up with later. It's so great to have this growing team of regional directors. And George, as our sort of person who's been in post long enough to catch his breath, perhaps. Could you just give us an idea of how your role has developed? It was a really new position when you and Mark were appointed, and there was sort of a whole host of things that we thought you might do. And just give us an idea of what you actually have been doing.
Well, I had a broad brief to connect with people in real ministry, in real churches, and listen to them, and then help Church Society be more useful for people. Already was very useful, but it was a good thing to do. So I've really been all about that, going around the different dioceses in the Northern Province and some of them in the Southern Province, especially before these two characters came along, and meeting with conservative evangelicals, usually in groups if possible, as that's already in existence, and listening to them. In some cases, helping particular people who are facing difficult times, one-on-one, just supporting them through that and seeing what Church Society can do to help them through. In some cases, helping groups to form, or to reform. In fact, probably a highlight is seeing the Manchester group, having had real struggles, sort of get back on its feet again and start getting together and working together. And I think there are two things that groups are really good for. Out there in ministry, we need support, and we get a kind of support from the diocese, but support from like-minded evangelicals is between churches and between ministers. There's no substitute for that. And when we're going through hard times, we really need it. And when we're facing difficult issues, we need to stand together. So support from each other. And the other big thing is being active in the diocese. It's much better to do that with a united front, with a group of people. So one of us can go on social responsibility, another of us can go on the committee for ministry, and so that we can have a positive influence on the diocese. Those two things in particular, and having that strong base, a springboard to looking at new ministries and establishing and securing ministries. So
really helpful.
That's the sort of thing that I've been involved in.
Great, thank you. We do appear to have lost Tony. I'm going to keep going and hope that he reappears at some point. George, I know you've been really passionate about particularly working with those sort of local groups, and that's so exciting to hear about Manchester Group really getting started, and others that you've been able to support and so on. Do those need to be official Church Society groups in any way? What sort of groups actually are they that you're spending your time with?
I'll work with any group. We're not trying to build an empire here. Right. If there isn't a group, I will encourage one to take shape. At the moment, to be honest, I'm just encouraging people where there's no Diocesan Evangelical Fellowship, a DEF, to form one of them, because it is probably the most useful format for responding to the issues that we've got with LLF. But it's to kind of harness whatever group. Renew groups are great. And where they've started up, they pioneer, established secure, healthy churches. That's brilliant. It's a group of people, and they can support each other. And they tend to always have that eye on the diocese as well. And so very helpful to mesh with those. The Manchester Association, the Chester Association decided to deliberately not have a label with any particular other group for that reason, so people could feel welcome. And with DEFs as well. I mean, it's a wider group of people, but there is a mandate there which is really useful. So I think it's just making sure there is a group. Yeah. We don't necessarily have a Church Society group, but we want to equip people in church ministries, lay and ordained. And a very, very effective way to do that is to bunch together.
Yeah. I think that's right. And it's one of those things, isn't it, that's going to vary between different dioceses. In some places, the numbers of people we're talking about, the numbers of churches and clergy we're talking about, will be such that you can usefully have a larger DEF, but maybe then also a smaller group that's more focused on conservative evangelicals. But if you're in a diocese where your DEF is only 10 or 12 people, it doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense to say we also need to be dividing ourselves into smaller and smaller units every 5 minutes.
And in a sense, I've been learning about that and learning how things work, and work quite well. The thing is, I mean, I passionately believe that episcopacy is biblical. It just jumps out the New Testament that we should be together in ministry across regions, across local churches. But the diocese doesn't necessarily provide all of that. We should submit to the structures as far as we can in all good conscience. But the support that we need isn't quite there to keep ourselves accountable for preaching the truth and things like that, and encouraging and spurring one another on to keep our theological root. So it's in a case of supplying what is lacking in the fellowship that we need, but then encouraging the diocese to do more of it.
Yeah.
So those two things.
Absolutely. Tony and Chris, I'm going to ask you, and maybe Tony, while you're here, in case you disappear again in a moment,
I'm going
to ask you to go first. Just to give us a bit of an idea, you mentioned, Tony, you said that this was sort of, I can't remember whether you said your dream role or something like that. What is it that you're excited about this role as regional director? What are you hoping to be able to do?
Well, I was just thinking, listening to George, this is great. I'm learning what my job is to be. Yeah. And then the internet went down twice. So sorry about that. I think what's exciting for me is having been in ministry for, in terms of parish leadership ministry for 21, 22 years, the sense of support. When I've had really good support and when I've not, the difference has been huge, frankly. Oddly enough, I can remember really clear to this day a phone call from one of the Church Society guys who phoned up completely out of the blue, because I was in the Church Society parish, to say, how's it going? What's happening? How are you? And we as Church Society, this is now more than 10 years ago, we at Church Society would love to be able to be more in contact and support you. And that was just great to hear. And the more I've spoken with different ministers over the years, and even now in my early retirement, the mentoring scheme going on down here in the Sussex Gospel Partnership with the Anglicans there, it's just so appreciated. And I, in the last 10 years of my ministry, really did have someone working alongside me, praying everything through, coming up with ideas, bouncing things around, saying, is that really your priority? Is that really what you should be doing? Encouraging me when it was. And so just to have an outside view is brilliant.
That's so great to hear, isn't it? I mean, we do still try and do that with our Church Society Trust parishes, to have good relationships with those churches on an ongoing basis, and to be praying for the work that's going on there, and just keeping in regular contact with the ministers there. It's not a sort of formal role that we have as patrons, but we certainly try to do that where that's appropriate. But also what's so great is having now people in this role as regional director to be able to do more of that for our members, whatever churches they're in, whether they're Church Society patronage or not, people that we just hear about who need that kind of help and support. We've just got a bit more resources at our disposal to give time to those individuals who really are in need of it. And I think it's probably fair to say, isn't it, George, that while a lot of your focus has been on the groups and the networking, for Mark, a lot more of his focus, I think, was on the sort of individual support that was needed, just because that's sort of how things came up in the two areas. And I would expect all three of you to end up with jobs that look slightly different because of different local needs, but also your different experiences and gifts. Chris, I wonder whether you have anything to add to that about what you're sort of hoping to do, what you're excited about, why you wanted this kind of weird job.
Yes. Well, in one way, it was the only way I could get George to stop phoning me, was to sort of take on the role. Because he kept phoning. Well, so actually, to be fair to George, as I'm not being unfair to him at all, but there was a sense that, having been on the receiving end of his phone calls over the years, I grew to say over the months, I suppose 18 months, I grew to appreciate what he was trying to do in terms of giving support locally. See that there was a real good sense in that. So I'd had a little bit of an idea what the role was, simply by the conversations I'd had with George over the past 18 months or so. I think one of the other things, though, which is important for me, was coming into Anglican ministry. I sort of fell into Anglican ministry a dozen or so years ago from Baptist ministry. And the Baptist world is quite tight knit in many ways. There aren't as many clergy, of course, as there are in the Church of England, and not as many churches either. But it is quite close knit, and theologically, although there's breadth, it's not as broad as the Church of England is. And then coming into particularly a diocese like Hereford, which is rural, where your neighbouring minister may be miles and miles and miles away, there is something more of a sense of isolation. And if you happen to be more conservative evangelical in your views, the likelihood of having anybody near you is pretty remote. So there was that kind of sense of isolation, and I felt that really right up until, through a long chain of events, William Taylor turned up to preach at a wedding in one of my churches about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, something like that. And I ended up in the corner of a graveyard with him, not in some murder sort of way with a sort of a mallet, but just talking to him about what he was trying to see renewers for, and looking at that agenda, and finally finding some place to start connecting into. And then through that and connections through there, particularly through Andrew Towner, his dad, by the way, used to be my rural dean, so I've got some sort of connection there, of just discovering this whole sort of world that was out there that I wasn't aware of, because I hadn't gone to Oak Hill and I hadn't done a curacy at St Helens or all those sort of normal things. I'm in a group of parishes which are not particularly evangelical, although one hopes they're more evangelical now than they were 9 years ago when I arrived. So what I'm particularly looking forward to doing is to try and to make those connections with people who are outside of a support network, and to try and bring them together, to encourage them, to resource them. And particularly LLF has been mentioned. No doubt some of them may be pulled into whatever diocesan responses are being done in their patch, and I think they will need support and resourcing in that, because certainly that's something which I feel that I would need in my own circumstance as well.
That's so great to hear, Chris. I think that is something that's really been on our hearts at Church Society for quite a long time, is how do we support those people who aren't in the networks already? How do we support those people who are out in small churches in the middle of nowhere? How do we support those people who are doing great faithful gospel ministry but feel like they are the only one? And it is hard to find who those people are and where they are, and make contacts with them, but hearing that story of just how much difference it's made to you, you just see how important it is that we are doing that and not just focusing our efforts on the people we already know and the names we all have heard of and the churches that we're all aware of. So that's really great, and it's so great as well to have that experience of people who are in churches that aren't traditionally evangelical, with congregations that are quite mixed, people who've not been taught well on things. And there's a lot of evangelical ministers who are in those kind of situations, and it's hard, I think, and having somebody that they can talk to who understands a bit of what that's like, I think will be really great. I am going to move on in just a moment to talk about what we think some of those issues are. You already mentioned LLF, obviously, but I just want to ask all of you, if people are watching this and thinking, oh, well, I don't know whether, oh, well, maybe this isn't really enough to bother a regional director with, or, maybe we're not really the kind of people that they want to be in touch with, or the kind of situation that they've dealt with. Who would you love to be emailing the office and saying, I don't know which regional director I need, but can you point me in their direction? What sort of people would you love to be hearing from?
Go on, George. You're the old man.
Thank you. I was about to say 18 months in, and I'm finally starting to get somewhere with the people I was out to try and find, who are isolated and who know that I was going to be there for them and able to offer some support. Maybe I'm just too slow. It's those kinds of people who are out there struggling on their own and didn't realize that we could give them support. People, if you are confused about LLF, most people are, then we are here for you. Church Society are genuinely here for you for that. And regional directors, we're right here for you to talk, to listen to where you are at with it, and to give you some direction and support with that. If you're in a local church and you want to do a biblical ministry, We want to equip you. I think that's what our strapline says, something like that.
Equipping God's people to live God's word. Yeah. And if that's what you're about, absolutely, we want to be helping you to do that. Tony or Chris, do you have anything to add to that at this point?
Well, I don't think you have to. I don't think people need to feel they've got a problem or they're struggling or they're about to give up to be in contact. I mean, I think I'm just trying to make contact with everybody and say hello, really, because we're not here to counsel you of all your problems and stuff, because we've probably not solved all our problems. It's not that kind of thing, but it's actually just to build relationships. I think Church Society's strapline is "We are a fellowship," and that is really good. And one of the issues I'm finding is that there are a number of dioceses in my chunk, and we've all agreed that the lines between our areas are sort of a bit porous, so you don't have to stick to them rigidly. But one of the things I'm finding is that some of the dioceses are really thriving. There's a big DEF, there's a big Renew or Church Society kind of group. There's all sorts of things. There might be big New Wine or Fulcrum Group, whatever. There's loads of support happening, and they don't really need another thing to be involved in. But there's a lot of, in fact, one of the issues I'm struggling with at the minute is finding out even if there are DEFs in some of the dioceses. And that's taking me quite a while to just investigate and say, so I'm just phoning around people and saying, has anybody heard of a DEF? Things like that. So it's a discovery thing. And I suppose if guys are in a diocese and they just, as dear old Chris sitting down there with his 16 sheep, are feeling a bit lonely and is there anybody out there, then just have a chat. And what I'm doing at the minute is just having a chat with guys about ministry, the encouragements, the wow moments, as well as the tough bits. So be in contact. Don't think you've got to wait until you've got a problem.
Really helpful. Really helpful. Thank you. And absolutely those sort of diocesan boundaries being quite porous. I'm so conscious of that here in Lichfield, where it takes 3 hours to get from one side of the diocese to the other. And if you're at one edge of it, it might be really helpful to know about who there is in Chester or who there is in Derby or whoever who's only a few miles down the road. And there'll be some reasons why it's important to know other people in your diocese, be able to respond to things that are going on there. But in terms of that kind of fellowship and support, having people who are nearer, and we do have a list of Church Society members and places, and we may be able to help put people in contact with local networks as well. Great. Chris, did you want to add anything there?
I think really I'll just echo what the other two have said. I mean, it's trying to don't feel they have it. I don't think there is a particular circumstance where you may say something is too small or whatever it is to phone up with. I think it is making that connection and finding your feet, which is particularly, I think, important in what is a very mixed denomination, and you can feel very much on one side. And the other thing which I'd want to add from my own particular perspective where I am here is I'll be delighted to hear from anybody who's thinking about looking at rural ministry, because it is very much something which isn't I don't know, it's not seen as big and exciting, and let's be frank, at times it's not. But and you're not going to get the big congregations in front of you because your congregations are split between 4 or 5 different churches. But nonetheless, there are tremendous opportunities. You have a very unique relationship with your population. The population tends to be more prayer booky, so they tend to be more evangelical than they particularly realise than they are. And there are tremendous opportunities to have influence at diocesan level as well, because in my diocese, there's only 80 odd stipendiary clergy. So there are plenty of opportunities to bring influence and to really get involved where that's needed. So I have spoken at Oak Hill on rural ministry and things like that. So that would be something which if somebody was just wanting to explore it, I'd be happy to have a chat, and when we're allowed to, even come up and have a look around and I can talk you through how it works.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll plan a future podcast episode on rural ministry at some point as well, Chris, and we'll get you and we'll get a sheep and I'll go and
the archers.
I'll go and record it out in the field just out here and something like that.
I hadn't realised Lee still had his sheep uniform, but there we are.
Yeah.
Plenty of sheep here, I promise you. Right. We've sort of alluded to some of these things as well, but as you are talking to people in local networks and in local groups and just other ministers as well. What are some of the things that you see are the pressing issues in the Church of England at the moment? So we already mentioned LLF, and that's obviously something that is on the agenda now and is going to be over, you know, coming years. What are the other things that you see that people are really concerned about, struggling with, wondering how to react to?
I think bigger than the pandemic and the LLF report and suite of materials, it's just exhaustion. That ministers are really confused about why they're so physically drained, and because it's a strange period to be a minister, but really struggling with their own kind of well-being. That's the thing that seems to be most common.
That's very interesting.
They're trying to deal with, I mean, obviously they're doing funerals for COVID-19 people, and they're trying to process LLF, but really, and the biggest thing, it's not just a background issue. There's a lot of real exhaustion and just tiredness, and they're really struggling. And pastoral breakdown and things like that's going on and driving them crazy.
Do you think, George, that exhaustion is something that actually has been an underlying issue for a long time that maybe the pandemic has brought to the surface? Or is it something that is just a result of having to minister in these really unusual circumstances this year?
I think one of the things is it's just impossible to analyze.
Okay.
And we're naturally analytical. We want to say, oh, why did this happen? Why am I feeling like this? And a lot of people are thinking they don't know why they feel like this, but it's not great. Okay. And I've got Christmas to sort out, and I don't know what to do about that. And so I think I just feel a great sense of which want to be alongside people. So I'm doing Zoom groups, and that's sort of going quite neat and tidy at the moment. I'm spending much more time now with one-to-one on the phone or on Zoom, or if possible, just getting out in my car and meeting with them, just to see if I can encourage them by saying, oh, I feel the same way.
Yeah, definitely. If you want George to come and have an outdoor socially distanced meeting with you, go for a walk or something, I'm sure he'd be, you know, delighted to do that. I think that's so interesting. I think I have had a suspicion for quite a long time that we have a conservative evangelical culture of working people into the ground. And I do wonder if this year, because everything has been made so much harder, that has just got to sort of crisis point, rather than being a specific problem. Yeah, good. Other things. I think that's.
Can I just pick up on that one a bit, because I think I've been seeing that year prior to taking on this role, and I'm still very new in this role, but I'm seeing the same thing as George is saying, and I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that we, as human beings, we need relationship and we need feedback. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, just taking services in church, for example, you lead a service, you preach a sermon, you talk to people before, you particularly talk to people afterwards. It's an engagement thing, and you're going to get real response. People have said to me on a number of occasions of late, and when I said, how do you think it's going? One guy said to me today, he said, I haven't got a clue. Yeah. No idea. Yeah. Why? Well, because I'm not sure who's there, and I'm not able to meet with them. I just started to see a few, and now I can't see them again. So how do I? Another guy who I've been talking with a fair bit felt very much the same thing. And as we talked and prayed and worked things through, he's just taken on 4 or 5, perhaps half a dozen, reading the Bible one-to-one. Some blokes who I said, you know, find 6 blokes you think, you know, got great potential. And he gave it some thought, and he couldn't come up with many. So I said, okay, can you come up with any blokes at all? He said, yeah, I can do that. And he's meeting, and he's just reading the Bible. He's just doing things like the Good Book Company studies. He's doing Man of God, a study that the Good Book Company put out. Something very simple, same study with each of them, one-on-one. And I'm sure it's doing those guys good, but it's doing the minister a power of good, because he's seeing he's got like a front row seat watching the Spirit of God wielding his word in other people's lives, and he's missed that for quite a long time.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because so much of people's time has been given over to things that aren't really word ministry, video editing and working out Zoom and all of those sort of technical things, which I don't think is a bad thing that the church has suddenly upskilled in all of that. But if that is what is dominating your diary each week, that's very different from filling your diary with pastoral meetings and Bible studies and whatever. And I think that's a really wise thing to have done. Yeah.
And of course, there are churches. I mean, we all know the principle of Acts chapter 6, where the apostles said we need to appoint some really good spirit-filled guys to look after the widows issue, because we've got to focus on teaching the word and prayer. And we think, yeah, great. But when you're actually pretty much on your own, you don't know how Zoom works or a video camera plugs in. You know that no one in your congregation does. That makes it even more stressed, because you have to do what you know you shouldn't be doing, but you have to do it in order to do what. And that, absolutely. I think, George, is exhausting. It's that being pulled in all these different directions and not being able to do what you're called to do, gifted to do, want to do. And that's stressful and it's tiring.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Good. Well, we're nearly coming to the end of our podcast time. It's been really fascinating to talk to you all a little bit. I hope people have felt like they've got to at least be able to put more than just a face to a name, but a voice to a name. And no doubt we will be hearing more in the months and years to come about how these different roles are going to develop and how you're going to be working together around the country. It is such an exciting thing to see this part of our work develop. And as we've said, please do get in touch. If you just feel like you just like a phone call with someone who'll listen for half an hour, if you just want to chat something through, it doesn't have to be a crisis moment. It doesn't have to be anything that you feel this is the most urgent thing in the world, but just if you need somebody to chat to pray with you, to go for a walk with you, if you're somewhere they can get to, but also particularly if you feel like you're on your own and you'd like to know if there are local people that you could be in a network with, people that you could meet up with, get in touch with us and we'll do our best to put you in touch with people. The best thing to do is to contact the office. So that's admin@churchsociety.org. If you can give us an idea of who you are and whereabouts you're based in the country, a church and a diocese is really helpful. And then we'll be able to point you in the direction of the person who can help you. Or if you've got a specific question, if you want to ask Chris about rural ministry or, I don't know, some of the things that we've been talking about, then do feel free to say, and we can certainly put you in touch with the right person. I'm not sure when the podcast will be back. I'm hoping it will be 2 weeks from today, when we will not be talking about LLF and we will not be talking about regional directors. Tune in to find out what we will be talking about when I've worked it out. Great. It's been really great to have you all. Thank you so much.